With an average house price in cities like Calgary approaching $500,000 and rents continuing to skyrocket, living in your own home is fast becoming a privilege many of us never realize. Hi everyone, glad you can join us. My name is Frank. Today I have with us Ed McNabb of 3D Printed Homes Corporation and a supporter of Tiny Home Alliance Canada. Hi Ed, how are you doing today?
I am well and wonderful, fine and fancy, and getting better all the time. Good to see you again, Frank.
So Ed, you're here today to talk about 3D PHC and what we can offer the community and what 3D PHC is all about and what we do and who all of us are involved in the company, of course. So let's just start off with talking about what 3D PHC is. Like, how did 3D PHC start? Tell us a little bit about your beginnings.
3D PHC, 3D Printed Homes Corporation, started in possibly the most Canadian way possible. One of our founders was sitting in a Tim Hortons talking to a friend and said, "Hey, I wonder if we could start a business printing houses. But I don't know how to build a house." And that friend went in classic fashion, "I may know a guy." An introduction was made, and those two guys got together and said, "Well, maybe it's viable, but I don't know how to build a business." And the second guy went, "I may know a guy." And that was me. And from those inauspicious coffee napkin beginnings, we got a founding group of directors, 4 guys, all shared the vision. And here we are, very nearly ready to launch and start building 3D printed tiny homes here in Canada.
So who are those guys? Let's talk about that for a quick second.
Okay. The original guy that I mentioned, without using a name, was
you. Can use the names. Let's call them out.
Oh, yeah. That was you. The first introduction was to David, our materials and construction guy.
David Pocock?
Yeah.
That's right.
Deep experience in the construction industry. Then me, pretty broad-based business experience. And then the fourth guy was Gary Tarasoff. And we met him through the hobby 3D printing community. Somewhat later, we added a fifth director, a friend of David's and a mutual friend through the motorcycle community, and that's Kurt Grant, our only non-Alberta director. He's out in Rockville, Ontario.
And he's pretty much a project manager, company manager.
Yeah, 35 years in the Canadian military doing logistics and project management.
He has a really interesting story. So, and then you are a CEO of the company.
I am.
That's right. And Gary Tarasoff would be then the technical supervisor. He's our techie guy. He's the guy that answers all the hard questions.
Absolutely.
That's right. And then David will be overseeing all of the construction projects when it comes down to really start building. He'll be from site to site, and he's going to be the guy that sort of ticks off all the boxes. Isn't that right?
That's right. We're really fortunate. David, Kurt, and I all have a background in project management, so we should be well on top of that.
Well, that's kind of what I was searching for, right? When I founded the company, and I knew that there was no way on God's green earth that I could ever do all the things that I understood needed to be done without having the professionals, around to help. And then that's how we kind of, we searched high and low and made sure we had some good professional people helping us, didn't we?
Yeah, it's really exciting. We've got the talent to kickstart a serious contender for fastest growing company in Canada this year.
So tell us a little bit about your advocacy and really what I really think ties 3D PHC into the tiny home community in a sense. Tell us about your advocacy a little bit and what is the real purpose behind 3D PHC?
Well, for me, it's been a mild evolution. When I first joined, it was specifically, this is a really good business opportunity. But as we fleshed out our mission and what it would take to get up and running, we came into contact with so many organizations that are working so terribly hard to address homelessness and housing affordability across this country. And we realized that one of the main features of this technology is that it can build homes not only much, much quicker than conventional construction, but for noticeably less expense right at the outset. So that set me in particular into meeting as many of these advocates as I could. And through that, I became an advocate, and I will stand on any soapbox on any platform and shout about the need for more affordable housing and the need to get our neighbors off the streets and into comfortable, functional housing. So I've done almost a dozen interviews now for various podcasts, sometimes about the company and what's cool about construction 3D printing, but mostly about how that technology fits into our nation's plan to house every Canadian over the next 10 years.
It really does become about building cheaper, but not what a lot of people think. I think, Ed, is important to note that it's not about using cheaper materials. It's about less waste, really, is where a lot of the savings that people, I think that a lot of the general public, maybe people in our community here, don't realize that it's not cheaper necessarily because we're using cheaper materials or materials that cost less money, but because there's so much less waste simply through being able to build faster and building with materials that cause less waste. Those two elements alone are huge cost saving opportunities, aren't they?
Yeah, we are not building cheap housing. Absolutely not. Now, with that said, we're not likely to be putting Italian marble on the floors. We'll be using ceramic tile. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's strong, it's durable, it's good flooring. We are not so likely to be using quartz countertops. That's expensive. It's pretty, but it's expensive.
Well, so but if you want it, you can have it.
Oh, absolutely. But we'll be building durable, functional housing. The less waste is a really huge factor in the reduced cost. Depending on which study you read, somewhere it's either 4%, somewhere between 4 and 10% of the material delivered to a job site is carted away to the landfill at the end of the job. As 8-foot 2x4s are cut down to 6 feet, and the 2-foot chunk goes in the garbage. The same with plywood and drywall and things like that. Because we make our material on demand, on site, and place it exactly where it's needed, at the end of the print, there's very, very little waste. A couple of 5-gallon buckets as we flush out our hoses and pumps and stuff, and that's it. So there's a huge reduction in waste there. The Canadian housing industry is facing an unbelievable shortage of skilled labor, and it's focused largely at the beginning stages of house construction, the cribbers and framers. The old guys are aging out of the business, and new people are not picking up hammers and skill saws to fill those slots. Every framer in the country is working flat out. They're working double shifts if they can to keep up with the demand for housing. And they're still not keeping up. So what we're going to do is we're going to slot in below the conventional house as far as price point. And we're going to use a programmable robot to do the work that framers would have done if there were framers to do the work. So we're going to save noticeably on the initial labor, and then the nature of the product is such that the exterior needs just a coat of paint and it's finished, meaning we can dispense with plywood sheeting, tar paper, chicken wire, and vinyl siding. And on the inside, it's the same. We can throw a coat of paint on it, or spray a coat of paint on it, and we don't need vapor barrier, drywall, taping, and sanding before the paint. So there's considerable material saved as well. And there's something really poetic about not cutting trees and then hiding them inside a wall.
Hiding in behind chalk. Yeah, for sure. That's an interesting thought, actually. Yeah, we we make our boards so nice and pretty, and then we just cover them all up. Um, uh, Now, using 3D printing construction, building small. So you want to maybe build a tiny home community. You want to build maybe a small backyard suite that would maybe be considered a tiny home. Um, what sort of things do you do about insulation, R rating, especially for up here in Canada, where a lot of questions you get, even about building tiny homes, is, because they have thinner walls, is insulation. How are you insulating them? Does it have a rating for further up north? What temperature ratings can you get? A lot of the questions surround that. So when it comes to the 3D printed wall, and printing small, you've obviously got limited space. How do you deal with that?
Well, the walls are printed double layer, very much like a piece of corrugated cardboard viewed on edge, where you have a flat surface or two flat surfaces and then a wavy piece in between. That does a couple of things. It keeps the two flat walls apart, and it adds an enormous amount of strength to it. So because we're computer controlled, we can simply make the walls wider or wider yet, and then fill those gaps between the flats with loose fill insulation for what I'll call moderate Canadian climates. And if we're going up, north of 60, then we could use self-expanding spray foam. Now, that's not typically the most environmentally conscious choice. It tends to have a fairly nasty chemical and carbon footprint. But if the need is there, it's probably a worthwhile solution. Because remember, these houses are made of concrete, and they are expected to last 100 years or more instead of the 30 to 40 years for conventional construction. So the cost benefit analysis there to get housing built quickly and cost effectively, particularly in the high north, is very real and very valid.
It really is. And just the whole idea of having something lower maintenance makes it really feasible for people that are trying to lower their own footprint on the earth by, carbon footprint, how much stuff they have. And having something that is going to cost less, as you move forward into the future, is going to help you realize your budget a lot easier, when it comes to 3D printing something that would have the footprint of a tiny home.
Yeah, and another point on that footprint, the carbon footprint issue, is that the homes are inherently, without any special engineering, they're inherently energy efficient. Mm-hmm. They are, after all, a large block of stone. And once you get that large block of stone warm, it tends to stay warm. They have a tremendous thermal mass, and you should expect 20 to 50% less heating and cooling costs without any special engineering. If you add some carefully placed windows and maybe a little bit of solar power, you can do significantly better than that.
I really like to speak to that part too, especially when I'm in interviews and people ask me about that sort of thing. And I like to explain that we use parametric modeling. We use computer assisted algorithms to show us what the most optimized internal geometry of a space needs to be, to create the whatever heat transfer properties that we require. So people say to me, well, what can you do? And my answer kind of ultimately has to be, what do you need done? And absolutely, and it's not that we can or can't do it. It's what do you need done? And then we say, okay, well, what math do we need to do? And what do we need to develop to do that? And you simply go ahead and solve all the little challenges as you go, and then you can do it. But the possibilities are endless, in a sense, as far as being able to build anywhere and have any properties that you require, that you need.
The housing construction industry in North America, at least, and possibly elsewhere, has been stuck for the better part of a century with building a large rectangle and then dividing it up into smaller rectangles, and then making sure there's a long, narrow rectangle that you can walk down to get to the small rectangles, And that's partly a function of the way we think, we've been conditioned to think, and partly a function of the materials they use. They use rectangular materials and they make square corners.
If you're in Minecraft, you can't build circles. Everything's got squares to it.
That's right. But with this computer-controlled robotic placement, we're not limited to rectangles in rectangles. We can build quite literally any shape we want. We can build curved walls at no additional cost to the homeowner. And that's something that's just unheard of in the construction industry. As a consequence, we can minimize internal walls, maximize air and traffic flow at no extra cost, and make the buildings more efficient just by intelligent design.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of really what got me into 3D printing to begin with, was just the idea that you could have a concept in your mind and you weren't limited by the engineering side of it.
That's right.
You could sort of imagine, and if you could put it together, you can model something, try it out, and then change it. You didn't have to have 6 years of engineering degree to sort of prototype something, and then you realize that can be translated to building homes
within limits. If you can draw it, you can build it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there are some Escher type things that you can draw but can't build. But in a practical sense, if you can draw it, you can build it, and that's pretty cool.
Absolutely, right. So tell me just yourself, Ed, and I'm actually curious because you and I haven't had sort of these sort of any philosophical conversations lately. Where do you see 3D PHC, say, 10, 15 years from now? I know that's kind of a long time in a technology company, so you kind of, the sky's the limit there. Where do you see us going?
It is a very long horizon when you're at the bleeding edge of a new technology. I will state flat out that at this point in our development, we have no interest in building multi-million-dollar houses on cliffsides overlooking lakes.
Yeah, we all agree with that.
There are hundreds of builders more than happy to take your multiple millions of dollars to do that for you.
Yeah.
So we are specifically focused on lower cost housing for more people. So where do we see that? How do we see that happening? In the beginning, we see two major revenue streams for the company. The first is to partner with affordable housing providers, whether they be government sponsored or charity backed, nationwide, starting, of course, in Alberta, to build low cost housing, or what's commonly called affordable housing or subsidized housing, for as many people, as many organizations as possible. In an ideal world, we would build so much of this affordable housing that these agencies would start to go out of business voluntarily. We're not needed anymore. The housing is there. People can live in it. At the same time, we're going to address the shortage of rental stock in major cities and minor all across the country. And we're going to do that by focusing on backyard suites, which are inherently specified within tiny home parameters for size, usually. So the concept there is someone already owns their own home or is in the process of buying it from the bank, no doubt at some outrageous price. And new zoning regulations all over the country allow them to put an auxiliary suite in the backyard. We can build those suites quickly and economically, and they can then be either rented out to the general public at market rates, or people can, for instance, take their grandparents out of an extended care facility, move them into the backyard suite, have them close by, safe, interacting with the grandchildren, and facilitate aging in place. Or if the homeowner is more middle-aged, their soon-to-fledge children can move into the backyard suite as a first step while they save money for a down payment for a more conventional home. So that will increase the rental stock, which will relieve some of the price pressure, both on rental stock and therefore the purchase, the open market housing.
Do you think building tiny, building smaller is part of that solution?
it's certainly our part of the solution. Do I see a point where the technology matures and there's enough tiny housing being built that companies like us may want to venture into 1,500 or 2,000 square foot homes? Yeah, absolutely. But in our case, it would mean buying a different printer and possibly even setting up a different division to do that, because it would have necessarily a different mission and vision.
Of course. So let's wind it down a little bit here and talk about what can we as a company, 3D-PHC, offer the tiny home community. So it's not something most people would think of as a part of, even the builder community of the tiny homes, but that's kind of a part of the demographic that we're aiming for. So what can we offer to our community, the Tiny Home Alliance community across Canada?
Well, I've already talked enough, I think, about installation of tiny homes in backyards. And that's sort of an adjunct or a side view to the tiny home community. I think we can best serve that community by assisting with creating tiny home villages. And these wouldn't necessarily be subsidized. These would be homeowner owned, possibly using a bare land condominium concept to reduce the initial cost and reduce the inflationary pressures on the buying and selling of land. So we'd love to build, a 20 to 50 unit tiny home community in your municipality, whatever that may be. Give us a call. Let's get started.
That's awesome. Well, I think we'll sort of end it there. Because we're going to get all of our companies back in probably midsummer or so for another interview to find out how everything's going. Of course, I'll already know how everything's going, but we're still going to come back and tell our community and let everybody know how things are going, and make sure that if we have something new to offer, make sure our community knows where to go to for that information. So with that, Ed, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you, Frank. Always a pleasure.
To everybody else, if you like these interviews so far and you want to see more, please subscribe to us here on YouTube, and make sure you go to Patreon and check that out, and check out our videos and our blogs, and subscribe there too, and do all that fun stuff that everybody always tells you to do. You know the deal. So thanks everybody for joining us today, and we'll talk to you soon.